Before I start this review, I do want to state that this is not a paid endorsement by minifigs.me. It's not sponsored by them, they just sent me the old design minifigure so I could give it an honest review. I will be comparing it to their newer Daredevil figure, which they did not send me, just to be clear. I bought this one with my own money because I think it'll be fun to compare the two designs, and I also just really like minifigs.me's products in general, so getting this new Daredevil model was a no-brainer for me. And with that being said, let's get into this double whammy review. So the first thing I notice when I look at the new minifig is the level of detail that has been put into it, especially when compared to the old design. They were both clearly designed in order to ensure they look like the live-action Daredevil we see in the Daredevil TV series. I'm always blown away by the sheer level of detail and craftsmanship that is put into a minifigs.me minifigure. They never disappoint when it comes to fine-tuned details, and both of these minifigures are no exception to this. I will say though, when it comes to attention to detail and level of detail, the newer model is a clear winner to me. However, I do have one issue with these minifigures, and it is this. The description of the new minifigure on the minifigs.me website reads, quote, "Please note, the horns are hand-painted and so may be less robust than our other custom printed pieces. It is recommended this minifigure is for display only." End quote. So I can only assume this applies to the old design as well. Now, when I read this bit of information about the minifigure, I was slightly gutted, because a minifigure with this level of detail not being usable for brick films is a travesty. So I will say that if you are planning on purchasing this minifigure for a brick film, maybe consider buying a different Daredevil minifigure, because like I mentioned, this minifigure, as stated by minifigs.me, is recommended for display only. Moving on though, I want to mention how well they nail the likeness of the live-action Daredevil in both of these minifigures. I will say though, I think that the new design nails the likeness much better when compared to the old design. The stubble on his face is a really nice touch with both of these designs, and one of my favorite details on both of these minifigures. Now, although these minifigures are recommended for display only, I do think that it is still worth getting the newer minifigure if you are a minifig collector or fanatic. It truly would look incredible on display alongside the rest of your minifigure collection. But looking specifically at the headpieces now, and we will slowly but surely make our way down the whole of both of the minifigures to compare the two. But starting with the head, like I mentioned, there is a real likeness there to the live-action Daredevil, and the stubble is a really nice touch to add that extra distinction between this being a design inspired by the live-action Daredevil and his comic book counterpart. And like I said, I do think the new design nails the likeness better than the old design does, but that is not to take away credit from the old design, because when it comes to things like coloring, I think it has a much more accurate color palette than the newer model in terms of looking more like the live-action Daredevil. Contrary to what I might have said earlier, I do also really like the horns, more so on the newer minifigure. I will say, however, the fact that they are hand-painted, as stated by minifigs.me on their website, means it really allows you to see just how much care and passion was put into both the new and old design alike, and even the manufacturing and craftsmanship of this minifigure. Moving on to the arms and torso now, I think The new design has a really nice mix of a Batman-esque, heavy-duty body armor type of aesthetic, while still maintaining that light spandex superhero suit that is more prominently seen in the comics. While the older model focuses more on the comic book-esque side of things, it clearly has less detail compared to the brown leather-like parts printed all across the new minifigure. Moving on to the legs now, you can see there are two separate parts printed onto the legs for both minifigures. The leg armor and then the boots. Starting with the leg armor on the newer design, it once again has a nice balance of a tactical and comic book-esque type look, like I mentioned with the torso piece earlier, while the older model maintains the more comic book type of vibe. It is worth noting, however, that the older model still manages to maintain the overall likeness of the live-action Daredevil, which does have a solid mix of tactical and comic book-esque as well, so I'm definitely not knocking the older design, but it is worth mentioning that the new design has much more detail printed throughout the minifigure. Moving on to the boots, printed on the bottom half of the legs. I've said it before and I'll say it again, you rarely see LEGO printing shoes onto their minifigures, so it is refreshing to see that extra bit of detail on both of these minifigures. Again, it's not much of a contest between the two when it comes to which one has more detail and is better printed. It's clearly the newer design. And going back to the issue I mentioned earlier of it being recommended as only a display minifigure, I do think it makes the most sense for these minifigures in particular, because when you buy a minifigure for a display and a minifigure for a brick film or animation, they are there to accomplish two separate things entirely. So for it to be made solely for display purposes, for those who enjoy displaying their minifigures, I don't think that is really a bad thing at all. It means that you aren't getting any compromises when it comes to things like detail and print quality, because they don't have to try to find a middle ground when designing the minifigure and manufacturing it so that it is functionable for both brick films and minifigure displays or collections. Sure, having a detailed minifigure in a brick film would be nice, but it's not exactly needed. In fact, oftentimes one could argue that it could even distract from the actual brick film itself if the minifigure has too many bells and whistles printed onto it. However, if you have a collectible minifigure on display, you are going to want it to be a detailed passion project, because it means it improves upon your display instead of weighing it down. Overall, I think these minifigures are both pretty great. I do think that the newer design looks much better than the older one, however. It is awesome to see just how much Minifigs.me have expanded and improved upon their previous design. For the older model, I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. And for the newer model, I'm going to give it a solid 8 out of 10, making it the clear winner in my book. So that about does it for this review. But what do you think? Do you agree with my thoughts or do you disagree? Is there anything you want to see me review next? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe to support the channel. See you later, and thanks so much for watching.